Revenue operations is much more than words in a job title. It's a methodology that is transforming sales, marketing, and customer success teams into high-performing revenue drivers. However, many revenue leaders still have critical questions about how to operationalize it. Furthermore, they want to know what others in the industry are doing. That's why we conducted original research and put together our findings in the 2021 Revenue Operations and Customer Acquisition Benchmark Report. In partnership with Rev Ops Squared, we asked hundreds of cross-departmental revenue leaders across top companies to reveal their approach to revenue planning, analytics and revenue operations, and customer acquisition. We've identified exactly how teams are aligning to hit their revenue targets, as well as the new activity, pipeline, and customer acquisition benchmarks to strive for in 2021 and beyond. Download the entire report for free at ringdna.com/RevOpsReport.
What if your sales team could know the moment a buyer arrives on your website and talk with them instantly? With Qualified's conversational sales and marketing platform purpose-built for Salesforce, that's all possible. It's not rocket science, it's common sense. Conversations move deals forward. Live chat, voice calls, and meeting bookers accelerate sales conversations without a single email exchange. Capture prospects in that magic moment when they're most interested in learning about your business. Head on over to qualified.com to chat with their team and learn more.
The junior candidates, when asked the question of what are your comp expectations, they are taking advantage of that in a way and asking for big jumps in comp, sometimes up to sort of like 80-90%. So they'd be asking for a base salary up to 80-90% of their highest ever W-2 earnings, right? And getting it. And what ends up happening is that the hiring manager ends up with a rep who has done a good job in negotiating for themselves, maybe has set themselves up somewhat for failure because they're now on a higher base number, higher quota expectations. They may not have ever achieved quota like that, and they may fail within 6 months.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Feargall Kenny. And Feargall's the president of Glenborn Corporation. It's a recruiting firm based in New York City that focuses on recruiting top sales talent, primarily in the SaaS world. He's also the founder of a new service called Verified Performers, which is what we're going to talk about today, because this is a service that definitely has the potential to disrupt the landscape of recruiting sales talent. So Feargall and I dig into what Verified Performers is, and he shares why he believes this is the right time for this service. And I agree. It's a great place to start. The way it works is that candidates have to agree to submit a form to the IRS requesting that they provide tax returns to Verified Performer, and Verified Performer, the organization, provides this verification of income to prospective employers. Now, in many states, as an employer, you can't ask about income at previous jobs. But if you're a seller, you do have a choice now to be completely transparent about what you've done in the past and provide that information, and you can do it all securely. Of course, it's not entirely clear that W-2 data all by itself, without context, tells you everything you need to know as a hiring manager. So Feargall and I dig into how to evaluate and use this information within the context of your hiring process. Now, to me, this is an important first step to injecting really needed, necessary transparency into the hiring process. So Feargall and I also dig into other things, other attributes, other bits of data that hiring managers need to verify on a candidate's resume, or perhaps what they've said in an interview, and we're going to talk about what those might be and when we might see some of those. So lots of great takeaways today. Stick around for these and much, much more. But before we get to Feargall, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also leave us a review. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Feargall, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a bit about Verified Performers.
Well, sure. Verified Performers is a platform that allows salespeople to verify their performance independently and effectively badge themselves on LinkedIn and on their resume as someone who has had their earnings verified by a third party.
And So, all right, that obviously surfaces lots of questions. Let's just start at the beginning. So, what was the impetus to start the company?
Sure. So I've been in sales for 20 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
The last 11 of that, I've been running my own sales-oriented recruiting firm focused on SaaS technology companies,
Right.
typically venture-backed. So I exclusively represent the sales chain of command from senior individual contributors up to VPs.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always wanted to find more objective ways to evaluate talent. Like any hiring manager, I'm constantly trying to find my clients the best talent possible, but also to protect the downside, to make sure that we don't get them to do make mistakes and do mishires. Right. So that's the impetus is the sort of the drive to find a sort of more objective measure of sales performance. You can the environment has changed a little bit. I mean, this isn't a novel concept, right? There's been there was a book written by Brad Smart 10 plus years ago called Top Grading for Sales,
right,
which was about using W2 performance data to evaluate salespeople's performance. That was just one metric that they used,
right?
But it was the key one that everyone remembered. But that's become a little bit more challenged in the last 2 to 3 years, because we have a bunch of states, over approximately 20 states and 20 local jurisdictions have pushed back and given you sort of like restrictions around what you can and can't ask when it comes to comp history.
Right.
So typically these days, the politically correct question is, what are your comp expectations, as opposed to what did you earn or what are you currently earning?
Right.
So this is a way around that allows people who are confident in their numbers and their abilities to proactively get their earnings verified and basically imply that they're ready to show it to anyone who may interview them.
Got it. So tell me, Feargall, why W-2s? Why verifying income? I understand, Brad Smart had written about this in Top Grading. I'm not entirely sure that I agree with this premise that tells us maybe as much as he thinks it does about somebody. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, well, as our sort of answer to that is that this is the only sort of truly independently verifiable number. Obviously, this is not the only metric, and we're not suggesting that this is the only metric that you should ask. It's really important to drill down on people's quota, their achievement, their deal size, how they got to their numbers. But it's hard to ask people to produce a commission report it's certainly not standardized, right? Mm-hmm. This process involves a verification with the IRS. So we get a transcript of the W-2 from the IRS, from every firm that you worked with for the year that you give us. Right?
Well, so tell us how that works, so people understand the mechanics. So, So let's even start more global. So for verified performers, is this something that sellers become a member of? They're paying a fee for you to serve. I don't know. Explain the structure for me.
Sure. So the idea here is that you will pay an annual fee. We're going to start it out at $50 a year.
As an individual contributor.
As an individual contributor,
right,
for the ability to effectively be a member and get verified by us, right? You basically sign up for the platform. As part of the process and the workflow that we've built, you fill out an IRS form. This is much like what you have to do in going for a mortgage application or applying for a mortgage. Your income in that case is independently verified by the IRS. They have a program called the IVES program, the Income Verification Express Service. We explicitly just look for W-2 transcripts. Mm-hmm. You choose up to 4 of the last 8 years. So we're giving candidates a bit of flexibility. They can choose 1 year, they can choose 4 years, right, of the last 8. We want to keep it somewhat recent. The better quality information is going to come from candidates who give us more recent W-2 years to look at. more volume. So 4 is better than 1, right? And preferably 2 firms so that they can show that they've performed across in different environments, maybe like with different management. So because obviously, when people are in one company for a long period of time, they can game the system, they can get closer with their managers, they can get better accounts, right?
Right.
So they basically fill out this form. They sign it. It's an IRS form. It goes off to the IRS. 5 days later, it comes back to us. We just take the information that we need, which is the high-level W-2 numbers. Then the candidate basically will provide us their OTE to compare against the W-2. So that's candidate provided. So the only verified number we are verifying is the W-2 number, not the OTE.
Right.
But we believe there's natural checks and balances that come into play by getting a candidate to provide their OTE, even if it's not verified, right? Because it ultimately, with most comp structures, especially with salespeople, typically over 100K base, it's a 50-50 split between base and commission. So if someone tried to game the system, let's say, by deflating their OTE, so their performance from a W-2 perspective looked higher, they're also potentially compromising their base negotiation position.
Correct. So you look at this information, and what do you provide to the hiring manager?
So we provide a range that they performed from a W-2 perspective, right? And we provide a rating based on the range. Now we may add some more details, right, at a later stage, and we've been toying around with whether to show absolute numbers or ranges. But we also want this to be somewhat candidate friendly. And the feedback we've got so far is that candidates prefer a little bit of a range because they are also potentially negotiating for themselves as well. So ultimately, we'll probably provide them a choice of absolute W-2 numbers or a range of numbers.
Okay. So the whatever certification or certification that you're giving to would you give to the seller or you give to the hiring company? You give to the seller, and they can say, they present it and say, this has been verified by you.
Exactly. Or they can ask us to send it to the hiring manager.
Got it. Okay.
So just to finish off the process, they provide us these details. We produce the report. We email it to the candidate. They can do what they want with it. We keep it on file so that in the event that they request us to send it to an employer, we can do it on their behalf. So it comes from us, not from them. And also we give them the ability to sort of, like, as I said, badge themselves. So, the logo, et cetera, that they can put on their resume, and the ability to join a group on LinkedIn so that they are searchable as a verified performer if a recruiter or hiring manager wants to add that filter to their search terminology.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, interesting.
And that's the difference. Like, these days, obviously, you can't ask people to produce the W-2, but they can volunteer it. So this reduces it was awkward to begin with, people asking for W-2s in the past.
Exactly.
Even people who are performers were sometimes reluctant to do that. They thought it was very forward, right, for companies to do that. But this is more reactive. You can proactively find the people who've been verified, right? But the assumption is that because they've been verified, they're more willing to give up their W-2 history, to a hiring manager, and that eliminates some of the risk in hiring them.
Yeah, I could see on sort of a proactive basis, a seller would want to keep that record sort of updated, right? Because you never know when the opportunity is going to strike, and might be approached about a new opportunity, and they can just say, I'm.
And hence the idea here is that this becomes a sort of an annual subscription. You update it. You decide, are those 3-4 years that I had in the report last year the right ones? As I said, we may enhance the info with quotas and deal sizes, right, just to give a little bit more context to the numbers. But you've also got to get the balance here of not asking for too much information up front for a very new service.
Yeah, for a new service, right. But as I'm thinking down the road on this, it's like some of the variables that you talked about really become important, because the thing with an income number, and it cuts different, lots of different ways, is there's no context to it, right? I mean, my fear is, in the absence of starting to verify some of the other things, is you're going to get hiring managers that, it's not going to shock anybody, that sort of take the path of least resistance and say, oh, well, I'm going to screen candidates purely based on this one attribute, without really understanding anything about the circumstances that generated it.
So we completely get that, and we're not suggesting that they do that. They have to look at the not only the hard numbers of quotas, deal sizes, average and range, and how they get to their quotas, but also the soft factors, the story behind their earnings as well, right? Which especially for up and comers and people with latent high potential is potentially just as important. So we're not suggesting that this is the only metric, but it is the only verifiable metric, and the absolute numbers do paint a story. I mean, the very fact that a company has outlaid this amount of cash, right, on for a given year for an employee is indicative of that employee's performance and their value to that firm. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So mostly agree with that. Just back to my point is, we say things like personality assessments or aptitude tests and so on that. I've unfortunately run into managers that's they look at that as like gospel, right? As opposed to
they're looking for some type of objective or semi-objective sort of assessment of the candidate. So they're in a way grasping at straws. I somewhat agree with that, in that you test how the candidate did on their assessment a year later, and you see if they hit the metrics that indicate success, and you tweak your testing. So, but most of the interview methods are subjective, right? The only real other objective one is the back channel reference, right? I mean, formal references provided by candidates are oftentimes they're teed up. Sometimes they're not hiring managers; they're peers, right? That are set up to look like hiring managers, right? So there's,
I'm sure you've seen a lot.
There's
not
a lot of treatment. Yeah, I mean, it definitely happens. There's no question about that.
Well, so when I was thinking about the W-2 thing and verifying income is it always calls to mind personal experience with hiring people that, and you see this in the Valley all the time, that somebody joined a company at sort of the right moment as they're having their big moment and made a ton of money, but take them out of that environment, they couldn't sell their way out of a paper bag. But they've leveraged that into job after job after job, sort of Peter principle to some degree, is that, and that's why this context, and I think having the verification of the income as a data point is great. But to your point earlier, is it's so lacking in context, is we need to find ways to verify some of these other points and attributes that you talked about. To me, anything that a candidate has on a resume or states in an interview should be able to be verified, right? Is that the seller should provide you, the candidate should provide you a means to verify that.
So, but obviously it's hard to do, right?
Yes.
So one enhancement we could potentially, do down the road is combine the W-2 numbers with self-reporting on quota, deal size, right? Quota achievement by the candidate as well. Again, when we're just starting out here, we're being careful not to ask for too much information from the candidate, right? We can probably get there, but there is an idea that we could potentially get a former manager to sign off on the numbers that the candidate is providing as well, as an extra layer of detail to sort of like cover the basis on what you talked about there. And to a certain extent, I mean, just to go back to your point about the the high performer in a very sort of particular environment at the right time, that's why we're giving up to the candidate's ability to select up to 8 years. We want it to be recent. We want it to be across multiple firms, preferably across multiple managers, so that you can avoid that. So as much as we're not giving the context, like the full context there, you can read into the number of years that people have given, right? If it's one, okay, they had a rock star year and they haven't done, the same again, but still they are validating, their performance and verifying that for 1 year, right? And obviously you can have the extremes where people have provided, multiple years, recent years, multiple employers, right? And just that information alone, speaks volumes.
Yeah, I have the concern that in the hands of many sales managers that it's just used incorrectly, right? I mean, it's something that is it's a verified data point, great,
yeah.
But I can see people trying to make decisions purely on the basis of that number, and to a point you'd made earlier is not really going the extra mile to try to gauge the potential of this individual if they thought they had underperformed in some dimension, or that what this individual can really bring to the organization. It's just going to be, we got this quick screen and you're not our person, and you sort of end up in this situation again in the hands of managers taking the path of least resistance. Is that there's only a relatively small percentage of sellers that are making quota and hitting their numbers. Not everybody can hire those people.
But it also protects it protects them from the downside. I mean, let's just focus on that for a second, right? You've got a very hot market right this second, where the candidates, especially the more junior candidates, and I'm obviously exclusively working in with SaaS sellers, right, in certain tech ecosystems. But the junior candidates, when asked the question of what are your comp expectations, they are taking advantage of that in a way and asking for big jumps in comp, sometimes up to sort of like 80-90%. So they'd be asking for a base salary up to 80-90% of their highest ever W-2 earnings, right? And getting it. And what ends up happening is that the hiring manager ends up with a rep who has done a good job in negotiating for themselves, maybe has set themselves up somewhat for failure because they're now, on a higher base number, higher quota expectations. They may not have ever achieved quota like that, and they may fail within 6 months, right? So this protects the hiring manager a little bit from that downside. And in the market at the moment, there's a significant convergence going on where it used to be, the value of salespeople used to sort of like differentiate between experienced and less experienced sellers, right? I mean, this is up to a couple of years ago. You'd have sort of like a 4-year seller maybe on 80K, and up to a couple of years ago, the standard sort of enterprise base level was 125K in the venture-backed SaaS business, right? So you'd have range. Now, if someone is at 80K base, 90K base, and they move roles, sometimes they're moving to 20, 30 grand jumps in base salary without justification. So you've got this big convergence that's going on between junior sellers and senior sellers. Now, some of the junior sellers grow into the role, right? And they actually end up being rock stars, and they're wiser than their years, and they earn more than you'd expect from them because they were smart negotiators. But many of them flounder, and I think you've covered a lot of in your podcast a lot of your commentators have sort of like have concerns about lots of people falling below quota. And that's part of what's driving it. It's not, part of it is maybe higher quotas, unrealistic quotas, which is certainly true, reverse engineered quotas that, for lack of better metrics. But some of it is about immature negotiators on the hiring manager side of things who don't drill down on the numbers enough to understand if this person is ready for that level of base and on-target earnings and that quota. And that's, we consistently see that. And sometimes we try and warn people, be careful what you ask for.
Exactly.
Because you're going to put more of a target on your back.
Yeah, I think we are going, and I've seen this cycle happen over the course of my career numerous times, and this feels like another one where the demand for sales talent is such that people with a little, let's say, underexperienced people effectively negotiating bigger base pays and larger comp packages. They get themselves in a situation then where the hiring company says, well, based on this, we're going to have to have a certain higher quota than they were accustomed to, even if it's a parallel field that they were selling before. And you start seeing this happen, is where quotas go up to justify what they're paying the sellers, and they're both unrealistic. And what happens is for these sellers is they never stay any one place long enough to really learn what the hell they're doing. And they find themselves after a certain number of years not only priced out of the market, but not being very good at what they should be doing.
And if you have, being a recruiter in this space, if you're forgiven for one short tenure, you might be given a bit of a pass for two. You have 3 in a row, it's really, really difficult to get another role.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly through a recruiter.
Right. And what they've done is create their expectations that, hey, I'm worth X amount. And they never really had to prove that they were worth it because there are companies willing to pay. I mean, it works on both sides.
And an interesting dynamic that's going on in the market at the moment as well is that, as a recruiter, we represent the hiring managers, and we obviously have a base range and an OT range that we play with, right? But so we make sure that the candidate is in the zone for that, so that everyone's expectations are set when it comes time for an offer, right? But these days, we're being asked about OTE, like base and OTE ranges, before even candidates will even talk to us. So
we're qualifying you, yes.
And before we have a chance to explain to them that they may not be worth what they are asserting. And I'm not saying that in a sort of like an obnoxious way. I'm trying to sort of like provide them guidance to make sure that they don't end up in a situation where they have multiple short stints because they set the expectations around themselves too high. It's
death to a career when that happens. I mean, I've seen people that I know that have jumped on that route, and I'm seeing it happen today in various companies I'm familiar with, where, when it's a sort of a quote-unquote seller's market, as it is today, as you said, is they can sort of command it, but they don't, face it. I mean, these are younger people that don't have a lot of experience in their careers, and it's hard to counsel them to slow down.
Exactly. And sometimes we never get the opportunity because they won't talk to us until the ranges are asserted, and sometimes they're put off because they think they can command more.
Yeah, no, this feels feels like a couple of cycles have been through before on that, and it sort of shakes out for a while, but then it comes back. So, I mean, what's your best advice right now for, let's say, a seller, sort of 2-3 years in, let's not SDR roles, but account executive type roles and SaaS companies, who are sort of thinking, well, gosh, maybe it's hot out there. There's a lot of froth. Maybe now's the time to go check out a new opportunity.
So, I mean, as not to sound self-serving, but
go ahead.
given my day job as a recruiter, yeah, by all means, test the market. I mean, firstly, check yourself, make sure that you look, that you've got enough tenure, that you've maximized what you can do in the role. Just consistent with what we're saying here. It's not about the absolute numbers of where what you achieve from a W-2 perspective. It's about the ratio and the percentage, overachievement of OTE based on a W-2 base, right? So if you haven't proven yourself and your ability to hit quota, and get your metrics in line. So I don't care if if you've got a 450K W-2 or you've got a 160K W-2. If you're on a 60K base, 120K on target earnings, and you've hit 160K, you're a rock star, right? And so just achieve that first, achieve the performance first, before you move around. Grass isn't always greener. That's the opposite of self-serving. But if you have achieved that, and you want to look around, I mean, it's important to, look at the space that you're in, give yourself extra range as a candidate, expand your verticals, expand your functional orientation, expand your industry orientation, yet still keep some type of thread to what you're currently doing. So there's logic in you applying to a new role. But by all means, explore the market, but ask a recruiter for their advice. There's also you can be at various crossroads. You might be an SDR or an inside seller. Do you go into inside sales management, or do you try and go to outside sales before you go into management? Some of those decisions you make can have a massive impact upon your long-term earnings ability. So think long and hard before you you take the management route too soon. So those would be some of the things, but that I would think about. Just try and lock down performance in your current role first. That'll stand to you. As I said, hiring managers are more concerned that you overachieved than they are about the absolute numbers. And they're also more concerned about protecting their downside as well. They want to, realistically, they want people who are going to be in the They don't necessarily need people who are going to hit 400% of quota. The lion's share of their number is going to be made by people between 75 and 125% of their number.
Right. They need a lot of just good sellers. They don't. Yeah, I'm sort of cynical about this whole idea that, and it's an obsession in this business about top performers, top producers, and it's like, at least in my mind, in my experience over the decades, is there's really very few of them. And what you really want is you want people who are good at what they do.
Absolutely. And you want people who can grind it out, who have a really good process, right? So, it is a rarity. I mean, we see it, firsthand, right? I mean, yes, we've seen in 11 years of doing this, we've seen a handful of people who've made $1 million in a year. $1 million plus. But most top performers, top W-2 performers in the SaaS space are making somewhere between 300 and 450, maybe 500 at a stretch. But most of the journeymen and women, who are solid performers, are making between 200 and 275 a year. That's the reality from a W-2 perspective. So we want to embrace those people as well. And it's also the potential of candidates as well. I mean, some of our greatest placements have been just that diamond in the rough, right? That you just sense when you were talking to them, or doing a Zoom with them, that this is a rock star to be, and they've just gone on to great things. But it's like catching them at that early stage when they haven't necessarily got the metrics yet, but they have the potential to. So again, back to the point. This is one data point, but there's a whole other set of subjective ones that you have to analyze as well.
And I just want to dig into that for a second too, because we're sort of circling back on a point we made earlier. Is when I'm interviewing someone, I'm really interested in what they've done. Right, not the numbers, great, but I want to talk about deals they closed. I want to talk about customers they worked with. I want to talk about scenarios, some of which could be verified, right? I mean, they say, hey, it's on the resume, I sold to these 4 companies. I want to know that they actually sold to those 4 companies. So what's the path forward if you can project forward? You've taken this one step with income verification. What's the path forward to verifying items like I just talked about? Yeah, I have on my resume, somebody comes to me and said on their resume they've got these 4 major enterprises they sold to, and then we dig down, I said, yeah, these were the deal sizes. Yeah, again, I believe that anything anybody tells me is fair game to be verified in an interview. Or anything they tell me in an interview is fair game to be verified. Get my English correct here. So what's the path forward to make that happen?
Well, I've made one suggestion, right, in terms of an enhancement, which was getting extra details from the candidate around their on target, their quota, their performance against quota, and having a manager sign off on it, right? That is contactable, that is verifiable as being in the right place at the right time as that person's manager at that organization. There's no reason why you couldn't do the sign-off process for the deals as well, right? Where it's customers are attesting to the fact that, yes, this was the lead salesperson on this particular deal.
And have the customers themselves do it.
So you've just come up with an extra leg and tail we can add on to this, Andy.
Okay.
So
we'll expect my commission.
Exactly. We'll call it the Andy or something at the end of when we create it.
Yeah,
but it's that's doable, I suppose, right?
Yeah. So one of my things in life is that, and this is a trend I think is sort of become exacerbated these days, is that we have the access to information and data and so on, and we look at it and we say, okay, well, I've got this information, but we don't really understand what it means, right? So we have this gap between knowing something and understanding it, and I think the same thing applies with hiring somebody, right? As I know what their income is, but I really understand what makes that up, right? I'm doing it in a way that's relevant for me to make my decision. And this is, buyers are dealing with this all the time. And so I think that's, some of these other aspects for me become really important, is because, I think if somebody claims something, they should be able to verify it and back it up. And so what you're doing is in that direction is people have to help you be able to understand. As a hiring manager, help me understand this.
Well, exactly. It's the first step. We could add those extra components to it, but it doesn't replace, the burden on the hiring manager to get the full context around the numbers. And the same applies to the candidates. I mean, if you look at the wide variety of resumes that we get, there's a basic lack of understanding on how to present numbers from sellers as well. The best resumes we see are the ones that show grids, right, of performance, where they've actually produced the extra information that I've talked about here, right, which is the explicit details on quota, average deal size range, right, quota performance, key deals closed, right, and the makeup of how they got to their number. So few candidates present that. Resumes, and LinkedIn profiles, right, are, there's obviously massive ranges in quality, right? But we see very few candidates who are properly able to present those numbers.
Yeah, massive ranges in accuracy.
That too, but even just high level numbers. I mean, it might be 5 years ago. It's hard to remember the exact ones, right? But just a basic understanding that this is what someone, this will aid people in making a decision around their candidacy. So there's definitely a distinct lack of awareness there.
But you brought something up that I think is really critical, though, which is, and I counsel young sellers in this frequently, which is track everything, right? When you finish a year, look back, or don't even wait, do it when you're going during the year, but start your own database of how you did, what you did from day one, right? Build this book of information about yourself throughout your career, because that's going to the point you just made about the best CVs and resumes that people see have this level of detail in it, is just think about, you're going to have to be completely transparent, because eventually all this information will be able to be verified. But lead with it. Be proactive with it. Put that out there on your resume. Don't feel like you have anything to hide. You are who you are. And yeah, somebody may hire you and you may think you're fooling them, but the truth always comes out. I mean, it's been my experience in sales is in hiring people, and Lord knows no one's ever perfect in people they've hired, but yeah, I've hired people I thought were fantastic, did what I thought was extreme amount of due diligence on them, just didn't work out for one of a number of reasons, but probably could have surfaced some of that if I'd had the ability to verify even more things on the resume and so on.
Yeah, I mean that's really smart. We come across candidates that do that take snapshots of their commission statements, and that just adds to the level of confidence, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
In the case of us as recruiters and us representing them, sometimes we've included them as exhibits, but that is rare. It is very, very rare.
Right. So, I mean, you think about it, and I think that unfortunately too many times candidates don't think about it this way, which is, and I know hiring managers always fear like they're being sold by a candidate, but they should be sold by the candidate. Candidates should be able to present a compelling vision of what success is going to look like when they hire this person into their company.
Yep.
And that should be based, and to your point about the confidence that could be able to happen or could happen should come from this data that you're providing the hiring manager about your own career. So, yeah, you really have, if you're looking for a job, you have to have a different perspective these days, which is transparency is really the way you build confidence.
I completely agree with that. And confidence breeds confidence, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think I wrote a blog post on that, which was based on Conor McGregor, right? I mean, just the fact that he is so brash intimidates his opponents. Maybe less so in recent years, but a couple of years back. But it's really it's the case, and sometimes that's the even on a phone call with a candidate, right? Forget, obviously we're talking about objective measures here, but there is an it factor that comes from talking to certain candidates where you're just like, they just grab you, right? Because of their confidence in their abilities, right? That you sense that they are a bit of a force of nature, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to represent them and you want to push them, right? Into your candidates because you are just sold, right? That's very much a subjective thing, but most of the time I get that sense, which is rare. They have the numbers to back it up.
Well, it's interesting. What you're saying is they're on the surface they seem great, but the detail is lacking.
No, I'm not. I think like the people who have that it factor are not only great on the surface, but they actually have the true performance behind them as well. But I'm just saying it's something that you sense. And it's just back to the sort of confidence breeds confidence. What's interesting, as a European in the States, we represent a bunch of European firms that are looking to expand over here in the States, mm-hmm. and they have to adjust. So I'm talking about, the relative confidence of American sales candidates, but Europeans who come over here to hire, they have to adjust to the fact that this is a whole other level of confidence that, versus the people they hire in their local markets. And so it's more like, hold on a second, right? Just because this person says they're great doesn't necessarily mean they're great. So there's a whole learning experience that you have to go through with European firms.
Of course, a big soccer fan, and when European coaches talk about why they like American players on their team, it's that quality exactly. Is the sort of brashness and confidence. Of course, you have to be able to back it up on the field, but as you do in sales.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. Have you checked out Ted Lasso yet?
Oh yeah, and actually in preparation, geeking out on it a second time. My wife and I just went through it over the last week and a half. The first season again, just in preparation for the second season coming, just to refresh ourselves. So yeah, but that's a perfect example of sort of the American attitude. And I don't know about you, but we're off track a bit. But what the heck, we're almost at the end here. Is that show is so human. It has so many lessons for sales. I mean, I've written several quotes down that they've quoted in the show that I thought, this speaks to the power of character and values, which, how do we verify those? That's an interesting point, but they are so important in what we do, and they're sort of given short shrift in the world these days. And I'm a huge believer that those who succeed most consistently are good at what they do, start from that place of being a good human.
Yeah, I've heard you consistently say that in your podcast, but absolutely. And I think culture and teamwork, that's a great, that show in itself is a great lesson in that. And I watched it in February in the darkest days of depressing Manhattan, where none of the restaurants were open, and it was really, really uplifting.
Yes, absolutely.
And a real reminder of the power of teamwork, right? Mm-hmm. And how powerful we are when we work together. And obviously in sales, there's a selfish component. We started this out talking about performance, but to your point about good humans, I mean, it's there's also been great people throughout my career who just wanted to help their teammates along as well, right? So to tie it back to Ted.
Well, but I think it is. We'll definitely have to get back. We'll talk about this in more depth in terms of hiring and so on, because you've got such a wealth of knowledge about it. But as a hiring manager, you have to. Yes, sales is an individual sport to some degree, but it's also very much a team sport. And are you when you hire people, are you hiring a seller, or are you hiring somebody to be part of a team? And it's something I'd love to dig into with you at another time, because I think that's a perspective that's just not looked at enough. Right? Everybody may have their own accounts, but to your point, there are people that helped you at various points in your career. You do have those type of people who are generous on your team. Right, that are givers in a way that's productive and are willing to help other people, or is everybody on your team a taker? And sometimes the highest performers are the ones who create the biggest whirlwinds around them, and create massive noise and in the organization and commandeer a lot of resources to themselves. So there's a downside to sometimes really high performers as well, right? Oh yeah,
because they become the center of their own world and don't focus on the teamwork aspect. So like anything, there's a balance, right? I mean, here it's not just about. Sometimes with really, really high performers, be careful what you ask for, right? Yeah. Which is why I do want to emphasize this is about finding the journey people as well that are between that 80 and 100, 120% of quota or W2, right?
Right. And, well, in my mind, those are the ones you want to invest in, right? I mean,
exactly.
Those are the ones that you build a team on, because. Yeah, I can invest a lot of money, and unfortunately, in too many sales organizations, the top performers, to your point, command the resources. They command the attention of managers as well, unduly, and it hurts the rest of the team. People could really benefit from coaching that doesn't take place, as we've seen all surveys recently. Any sort of direction, personal development guidance, and the like.
No doubt.
All right, well, Feargall. It's been fantastic. Well, I said we'll definitely have you back. I love talking about hiring, and and look at maybe more from the hiring manager side in terms of also the processes people are using for hiring. Because one of my ideas I'm passionate about that I don't see enough is really sort of data-driven hiring and decisions, and there's a lot of room for improvement there. So if people want to learn more about verified performers, how can they do that?
So verifiedperformers.com is where you'll find us. And you can also find us on LinkedIn. And we're in beta right now, and it'll be fully live by the time this podcast goes live. So, come along, sign up. There's there are some processes and some steps you have to go through to get verified. So reach out if you need to get more comfortable with the process. But any questions, send them my way on LinkedIn or Feargall at Verified Performers.
And I think for a final closing point that you made is it's not just for top performers. I think that if you're, as you said, sort of in the 75 to 125% range, you're a good, solid performer, which is fantastic. Those are the people I love.
Yep.
Don't worry about the fact you're not measuring up to others. This act of transparency is going to be hugely powerful when you interact with hiring managers. So I really urge you to consider checking it out.
Yeah, no question about that. And remember, hiring managers, you got to look at it from their perspective. They are trying to protect their downside, and when they combine that together with all the other subjective factors from meeting you and going through the interview process, that's how they're making their decision. Yeah. It's not on this one number.
Perfect. All right, Feargall, thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate you having me on.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Feargall Kenny, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Hi, friends. I have something really exciting to share with you. We're launching a new podcast called the Rev Ops Podcast as part of the Ring DNA podcast family. Today's leading B2B companies are embracing revenue operations as the answer to misaligned people, processes, and data that lead to recurring sales inefficiencies. However, many people still have critical questions about RevOps. What processes and tools do I need? How do I structure my team? How do I measure outcomes across sales, marketing, and customer success? And what are the best practices for doing that? So join Jordan Henderson, Jonathan Stevens, and Brandon Redlinger, and some of the world's leading revenue operations leaders as they tackle the important questions many of you face today when building a RevOps function. From Ring DNA, the company that transforms sales teams into high-performing revenue drivers, comes a podcast guaranteed to go beneath the surface-level conversations and dive deep into the world of RevOps. Your hosts deliver unfiltered, thought-provoking discussions and actionable takeaways on every episode about the ideas, processes, and technology changing the B2B sales landscape. Visit ringdna.com/RevOps to learn more or subscribe now on your favorite podcast player. What if your sales team could know the moment a buyer arrives on your website and talk with them instantly? With Qualified's conversational sales and marketing platform purpose-built for Salesforce, that's all possible. It's not rocket science, it's common sense. Conversations move deals forward. Live chat, voice calls, and meeting bookers accelerate sales conversations without a single email exchange. Capture prospects in that magic moment when they're most interested in learning about your business. Head on over to qualified.com to chat with their team and learn more.